The Prime Minister says he will make an announcement within the next 2 weeks about funding for a new port that would facilitate the export of liquid natural gas to Europe. This comes after Carney had talks with Germany's leader about being a supplier of LNG. We're joined now by Heather Exner-Pirot, Senior Fellow and Director of Energy in Natural Resources and Environment at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. Heather, thanks for joining us. You've been doing a lot of work on this. Just for example, you were a co-author of that report in July, Canada's Energy Future, under the auspices of Carleton University. And you've been doing a lot of research and op-eds, so you're all over this file. Thanks for joining us. Or I think what do the Brits say? You're across this one. Now, can we start off with the prospects of Churchill, Manitoba being an LNG export hub, if that's what the Prime Minister is thinking about? Is that reasonable?
Yeah, so we're all wondering what the Prime Minister is thinking. We're talking about a port in Churchill, and of course there is a port in Churchill. There's been a port in Churchill for about 100 years. It's never been particularly busy, and it's never attracted a lot of shippers. And the main reason for that is because it's a seasonal port. So obviously it's towards the Canadian Arctic, at the very tip of Manitoba in the Hudson Bay. It's frozen over for about 8 months. The shipping season is 3 to 4 months, and so it hasn't been that attractive for shippers to invest in the infrastructure to do it. Now, in the last 7 years, we have invested about $500 million into refurbishing Churchill for things like grains and minerals. Still not a lot moving through there, and now we're talking about using it for LNG. So we'll see if LNG has a better chance, but my analysis suggests it doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think, apart from the West Coast, is there any logical option? Would you move it all the way over to Thunder Bay, Ontario, for example, the LNG? That'd be quite a project, I guess.
Yeah, so when we talk about moving to Manitoba, obviously, the expense of building a pipeline and a liquefaction facility to only get 4 or 5 months or even maximum 6 months use of it, it's not a good business case. Obviously, to the West Coast, to Asian markets, it's a very good business case. If we're talking about wanting to go to Europe, there have been a number of projects proposed. There have even been some projects rejected by the federal government. Some of that would ship from the pipelines we already have existing, feeding into Quebec and Ontario, Western gas. But there is another option, and that's to produce some natural gas from the Atlantic. There's actually some very good natural gas basins in that part of the world, and maybe that would be a logical place to start looking.
Well, do you mean like the shale in Pennsylvania and places like that? I didn't know we had that much.
Newfoundland offshore has quite a bit of natural gas. New Brunswick has some natural gas. And actually Quebec has very good natural gas deposits, because what extends from that basin, the Utica, extends into Quebec. Now there have been bans on fracking in many places in that part of the world. You would maybe want to take those off. But all which to say is exporting natural gas from the Rockies is a long way to go to get to Europe. And there's some other places we should probably be looking first.
I know this is going back over ancient history, but the former Prime Minister, people say, well, he ruled out exports to Germany of LNG. He said there's no business case. I thought and I'm not trying to resurrect his blessed memory or anything, but I thought he said something like there hasn't been a business case until now. Are people being too hard on him? Did he actually slam the door on LNG shipments to Europe?
So there's a matter of, is it competitive with Gulf of Mexico? How could we make it competitive with Gulf of Mexico? There were proponents that brought forward projects. There were projects that were rejected, brought by the private sector to the government, that were rejected by the government. In fact, Saguenay LNG was rejected in the same month that Russia invaded Ukraine.
By the Quebec government.
And the federal.
Okay.
They both rejected it. So all which to say is there have been private projects that thought that they could make money off of exporting through the East. What I would suggest for the government, instead of subsidizing LNG through Churchill, probably at a loss, is to create conditions under which private proponents may want to export LNG, and let the private sector decide what actually makes sense from a business case.
I know getting inside the mind of Quebec politicians is a tricky task, but do you think they would be open to allowing, I mean, they were cool on it before, would they be open to allowing LNG to pass through their territory in one way or another?
I mean, they have expressed more openness absolutely in the last 6 months in public. They've expressed more openness of getting, frankly, the gas that's exported from the West already going to Quebec and extending some pipelines. The Premier of New Brunswick has a pretty good proposal lined up to do such a thing, to extend a pipeline from Quebec and through New Brunswick. Again, the most important thing in my mind, I don't think we want governments picking and choosing winners. That seems to be what they're planning to do with the Port of Churchill. But still, we have to work on creating those conditions in which investors do want to invest, do want to build LNG terminals, and let's see what pops up. But right now, we haven't seen any improvement in the investment conditions for oil and gas. We still have an oil and gas emissions cap. We still have the same Impact Assessment Act. There's a lot of things that need to change for investors to be interested.
Is that emissions cap, is that a major roadblock, do you think, to oil and gas exports ultimately?
It's a major roadblock to oil and gas production. And so, I'm glad in this country we are embracing LNG. There doesn't seem to be a political realization that to have LNG, you have to have the NG, the natural gas. And if we are meant to cap emissions and go 36%, whatever, roughly below current levels by 2030, there is no room for more oil and gas production. We still have a carbon tax on top of that. So no, and I know this is an issue, and we're trying to get investors for the West Coast terminals, LNG Canada Phase 2, Silesum's trying to get FIDs on those. Investors in Asia who are planning to spend billions of dollars are curious about that emissions cap and how it's going to affect those projects, and there's no good answer. So if we really want to be shipping more LNG anywhere, let's start with some of those fundamentals. So
by your lights, Danielle Smith and the oil industry are right when they say this emissions cap has to go or has to be modified in some way.
I would say that's the number one thing that the oil and gas sector is looking to change. Although, you can't, again, go ahead and build a pipeline. There will be nothing to fill it unless we change some of these other regulations that are hampering production.
More broadly, you wrote a piece a little while ago, or you co-wrote a piece, I can't remember if you were the sole author, but anyway, that you said that there is so much oil in Canada that one way or another it's making its way to global markets.
Yeah, so I mean, we still have the oil. People say, have we missed a window? Have we missed a boat? We certainly missed a window. But do I think human civilization will still require some hydrocarbons in 100 years, in 1,000 years? Yes, in some way. Maybe we'll stop burning it, hopefully sooner rather than later. But we're still going to use those molecules because it's just a magical molecule that makes a lot of things and makes a lot of sense. And we're still going to have those reserves in Canada. And we're still the only democracy that has reserves like that. And so eventually, our allies, again, we've seen this now with natural gas, eventually our allies are going to say, you need to start providing this because we are tired of being dependent on authoritarian countries.
Now, the Bill C-69, I believe, has now been renamed the Environmental Impact Act. And that was the legislation that was called No More Pipelines and all that. There are suggestions that I've seen that Danielle Smith, for example, is no longer calling for abolition of it, but she wants it changed because going back to the drawing board would just create more delays. Can you give us any color on that?
That is for sure the perspective of the business community. So it was before it was legislation, it was Bill C-69. As soon as it passed, it became the Impact Assessment Act, or the IAA. And it is, and there's absolutely tweaks that need to be made. But yes, in the business community, and that is a position that has come out of CAP. It is a position that's come out of the Business Council of Canada. They're looking for reform. There's some very big things that you could do to reform it, but it's fairly simple. Mostly involves narrowing the project list to not capture things that should be under provincial jurisdiction. So yes, no one wants the pendulum swing of having a different, entirely new environmental assessment regime every 4 years or every 8 years. And so there are ways to improve the one that we have now that would, unleash some of this investment.
Leave us with a final thought. I mean, a few pipelines were built under Trudeau, but we've had a dearth since then. Are we going to start building more export pipelines, particularly for LNG? Do you think we're going to see that in the next decade? I'm sorry, we're tight for time.
No, Andrew, we're building an export pipeline for LNG. It's the Prince Rupert Gas Transmission.
Right.
It has It has started construction, and it would feed Silesum's LNG. It looks pretty good, and if we can get rid of some of these, if we can get approval of it, and if we can get rid of the emissions cap, you would probably get an FID very, very quickly. And the contracts will only come after you get that FID. So that is probably the easiest win, the lowest hanging fruit that Canada can do right now to diversify its exports, expand its GDP, is getting that project over the finish line.
Thank you, Heather. I really appreciate it. Heather Exner-Pirot, Senior Fellow and Director of Energy, Natural Resources and the Environment at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute.